and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. This is Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs.
Hello everybody, and welcome back to Irreverend, Faith and Current Affairs. We have a full complement of vicars today. I don't know if there's a word, a collective word for, three vicars, multiple vicars, a sanctity of vicars.
Probably a chapter. It's almost certainly a chapter.
Is it a chapter? Okay, yeah, a chapter. Fine. It's not as good as my one, but So me, Jamie Franklin, Tom Pelham, and Daniel French, the Three Musketeers. How's it going, chaps? Tom, you were just looking very happy today.
I'm looking slightly luminous actually, because all the light is at the front, and I haven't yet sorted the light in this room out properly. I don't know why.
You're transfiguring.
I am, aren't I?
Transfiguring yourself.
And you have three dwellings behind you, three chairs. So.
That is true, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's all very symbolic. I'm really good, Jimmy. Well, I'm a little bit sad. Well, I'm happy to be here, but I'm sad because it means that we're missing. We had to cancel the school sports day, so I would have been scoring for our local church school's sports day, which would have been joyful as well. Because it's good to see them outside, engaging in healthy competition. Yeah,
and fair competition as well, I assume, Tom.
Obviously fair with me there. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. But no, none of the controversy we've seen in the culture, presumably, if you know what I mean.
I don't think they'll be taking the knee before every race, I hope.
Well, I wasn't actually referring to that, but that is
it'd be quite funny.
That's another thing. Yeah. How old are they? 7 years old.
Yeah, 7-year-old. Yeah, just before the just before the spoon and egg race, everyone takes the knee.
Oh man, funny time. So you weren't going to be here, but we're pleased you are, Tom. Maybe the Lord has a purpose in your. Well, I'm sure he does. Yep. I'm sure he's got a purpose in everything. Daniel,
God
French
is working his purpose out. Yep.
Indeed. Daniel, how are you today? Nice to see you.
Fine, thank you. Great to be back after a few weeks. I was in Cambridge a week or so ago and had lunch with Rod Dreher and Calvin Robinson and a few others. It was grand. Yeah, really
nice.
Good.
So what's Rod Dreher like in person, Daniel? Is he a tall man? Is he short? Is he wide? Is he thin? Did something particular stand out? Is he as you imagined he would be? Or?
Yeah, I think so. He describes himself as somewhat hobbit-like, and I think that's probably a very good description. Actually.
Okay, he dresses well, doesn't he? He's dressed smartly and stuff.
And he's more. He's a sort of quieter person. Sort of, his writing is obviously very, very sort of gregarious and out there. And I think in person, he's not so full on in that respect. You might think so. He's a deep thinker. He's a guy who, as he said, lives in his head in a glorious way. And so it was great. It was great to have lunch. Yeah, and great to chat and
nice
meet in person on a gloriously stunning day in Cambridge.
Oh, lovely! Yeah, Cambridge, great place.
We've had him on Irreverend, haven't we?
Yeah, you weren't here. We should do it. We should try and get him back on because his co-host Kale Zeldin would be good as well. Kale Zeldin actually follows us on Twitter. I noticed the other day, which so I thought, maybe he listens. Yeah. Maybe he listens to the show.
Good guy. Yeah. Very. Between them, there's a fantastic podcast they had, didn't it? General Eclectic. Yeah. Shout out for it there. It's very, very good.
Yeah, they had an excellent episode with Matt Walsh, which I've mentioned before a couple of weeks ago. Really good, actually. I mean, really important in terms of like stuff he was saying about the family and things like that. I know it's an American context, but increasingly relevant to our context, as we'll see.
It translates well.
Yeah, it does. Okay, well, just to say for people who are thinking, what's this podcast I've stumbled into? Last week's podcast doing really well, by the way. For some reason we got a massive bump in our stats on Sunday, so I don't know why. Sometimes things like that happen. Somebody shares us or something. So anyway, that's doing really well. We are vicars, priests in the C of E, various stripes, and we talk about current affairs from a Christian perspective. That's it, basically. But it appears to be some kind of crazy USP that we've stumbled upon to provide commentary on all the things that people are talking about. So that's what we do. in the show, but we like to start with a prayer and a reading from Scripture, because we believe that Scriptures are relevant to what we're living through today. And I believe, Tom, you're going to share something with us from one of the more, shall we say, controversial passages in the New Testament, Romans chapter 1.
Is it controversial? I mean, only controversial if I mean, it's also the sort of.
If you don't like what it says.
Well, if you don't like what it says, if you're not a Christian, I guess. But there are all sorts of things that are controversial if you're not the thing that they're aimed at, isn't it? I mean, Anyway, Are we going to start with the prayer though? I think it's always sensible.
Please.
Should we say the Lord's Prayer?
Yeah, just do the Lord's Prayer and try and remember the words this week, Tom. Embarrassing. It was embarrassing last week.
It was. It's the sort of thing that you sort of worry about, and then you get it wrong. All right, let's pray. So, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen.
Do you know what the problem was last week? You said to me, and I was very fast this week, so sorry to those who said do it slower, but you can do it slower. I just forgot where I was because it was so slow. So, I do know the Lord's Prayer, guys. They teach it to you in Vicar College. And before. No, they don't.
That is one of the... it's one of the nightmares, isn't it, of presiding, that you'll be completely shown up and forget it in the middle of some great service.
It's the one that's next to the nightmare of forgetting the name of the deceased in the service.
Or the people getting married.
Well, the worst was probably the baptized. Baptized in the name of
getting the gender wrong.
I don't know. I think
Daniel. It should be sex. Let's not fall into this. It's sex.
Oh.
We had a long conversation about this last week. I think probably the deceased in the funeral is the worst one.
They're all pretty bad, though. They're all pretty bad. Shouldn't be done.
Then wedding.
When a baptism. I mean, if you get to the actual point of baptism, like, what is the name of this child?
You could just sort of mumble, because you only have to say the first name, can't you? You could just say, I baptize you. It's not like a legal thing, is it? And the Lord knows who you're referring to.
Really? Just say child.
I baptize you.
Child, I baptize you in the name of the...
I had a couple years ago he was called Charles and she was called Donna. They presented themselves on the wedding day as like they'd had sort of massive sort of makeovers that were quite funny, and it was just you couldn't stop looking, really. And at the it was a university chapel up in Scotland, and I suddenly went into sort of Robert Runcie mode and said, "Do you, Charles, take Donna?" It's really difficult. I had another one where there was a lady. She was called Julie, and I realised that he was a famous cricketer actually from Kent, and he was surnamed Andrews, and I realised she was going to become Julie Andrews.
Oh, nice.
I just got the giggles, really. What you do when you're sort of 29, newly ordained, and you just start sort of humming to yourself the sound of music, and you think Julie Andrews.
Before the bitterness and cynicism are set in.
We're in real danger of falling into the vicar trap of talking endlessly about occasional offices. So we should stop that now.
Come on, let's have Romans.
Let's have some scripture.
Okay, Romans 1.
So Romans 1. So some background. This is a letter by Paul. It's his longest letter. It's his most the letter which probably, I think it's fair to say, most fleshes out his ideas about salvation and about grace. It's a very influential letter on the church, and especially on the Reformation. It sort of sparked Martin Luther to rethink what grace was in the beginning of the Reformation. But just this little bit of it is Romans chapter 1, verse 18 to 23. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men who by their wickedness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. Ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things they have made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their senseless minds were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, or birds, or animals, or reptiles. So there's a lot going on in this passage, and it's sort of worth just unpicking a few bits. So who is it he's talking to first? He's talking, I think, about the Greek, as Paul put it, the Gentiles, so non-Jewish people who do not know God through the scriptures. That's important. They don't know God through the scriptures. They know God not by what is written, but by what they can see in the world about them. So what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. So the idea here is that all humanity has some concept of God, not a full concept of God by any means, because that's full concept of God is only found in the scriptures, only particularly in the revelation of Christ. But they have enough of an idea about God to know what they should and shouldn't be doing. And what they're doing is, despite the fact they perceive him, they are exchanging his glory for images resembling mortal man, or birds, or animals, or reptiles. And there's an obvious first level sort of reference here to idols, so literal idols, which of course the ancient world, indeed the modern world, a number of religions still do worship. And of course, in the Bible, we have a number of stories about idol worshipping, particularly the golden calf and the wrath of God against the Israelites because of that. You know, they turned. That was the Israelites turning away from the knowledge. But this is probably talking more about the Gentiles, the Greeks, the non-Israelites. So I think, though, it's not unreasonable to go beyond the sort of literal interpretation and have an analogy here, which is that in general, the root cause of sort of sin is not worshipping God, but worshipping something other than God instead of God. And Romans goes on to say that this this innate sort of failing of humankind, and I think that's fair to say that it is an innate failing of humankind. We tend to fall into idolism unless we're careful, is the reason that God gives us over to sin. In a way, Augustine put it as people got what they wanted. You know, Adam and Eve got what they wanted. They got freedom. They put something else in the place of God, namely their own desire, and as a result, they gained a disordered desire, which cascaded down through humanity. That's what original sin is. So here we are. It's you know, there are a number of things we could say people are putting in place of the truth of God. I think currently the biggest problem is people are putting the truth of the self in front of the truth of God. I.e., it's almost a solipsism, which is a technical term for sort of self-worship. That our wills, what we desire, what we think we perceive, are placed above and beyond the place of God. And therefore, people who are claiming to be wise are actually being foolish. They're being foolish because they're taking something that's transcendent and replacing it with their own limited idea of what reality is. And so, and it causes all sorts of catastrophe. I think it causes a lot of this transgender catastrophe, which is all about self-perception overriding the created order. You know, and again, that creative order, which shows something that's of God, you know, so we're made in God's image. What can be known about God is plain because God has shown it to us in his created order. So overriding that with our wills is making humanity very foolish indeed. And I think this is one of the sort of cardinal reasons that you know, what Paul is talking about is a creation theology. He's talking about a world that's disordered from the way that it should have been. Anyway, I'll stop there and ask if either of you have any anything to add to my sort of miniature homily.
Yeah, I think the sort of summary verse is a little bit two verses after where you finished, where it says they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the creator who is blessed forever. And it sort of indicates that human beings have a sort of religious propensity even when they don't worship God. And I think there's something you see in the secular world all the time, everywhere, this kind of, I mean, we'll talk about some of these manifestations of religious sensibilities later on in the show, but just there is a desire for human beings to worship something. So if they don't worship God, they'll worship something else, something he created. And I think I'd go even further than the thing about the individual. I'd say it's the individual will that is the object of worship. So the will now is in a position where it can delineate reality, even if something is quite clearly not reality. So the transgender thing is the sort of most extreme example of this. Everyone knows that men are men and women are women, but because somebody wills that not to be the case, that has to be, or rather that subordinates the actual ontological and biological reality of sex to that person's will. So I think that's what I would say about it. Yeah. So in some ways, it's obviously a very sort of gloomy passage in lots of ways, but there's actually a sort of positivity in there, because it shows you that people do desire, or at least people are on some level desirous of an object of worship. It's just lots of people, particularly in our culture, are very, very confused about that impulse and how it should be manifested.
Could I add to that? I think what we could easily forget as well from the first century is that when people created, say in your Greek house, you created a little shrine with some idols, your understanding was not that was a piece of wood or stone, but somehow that was a channel you were somehow containing the kind of spirit, or controlling the spirit of some kind of deity, some kind of spiritual power or manifestation, so that you would, it wasn't that you were stupid, and you were thinking, I'm bowing before a statue of Zeus. The general understanding was that somehow Zeus was being placated and controlled and tuned into through this idol, so that the idol has a spiritual danger with it. And I think that what we can, I think it's just becoming increasingly clear at the moment. I know we're going to talk about things like what happened at Glastonbury subsequent to Roe versus Wade, but that there can be we miss the underlying sort of dark forces that idolatry also tunes into. So it's that side of it's easily missed, and likewise in the idolizing of the self, we're actually scratching and tuning into powers that are not just psychological or within our head, but if you get the kind of the biblical cosmology, we're potentially opening ourselves up to sort of wider, darker spiritual chaos. We're sort of creating our own kind of Ouija board. We're turning ourselves into that through idolatry, because it is not God-centered.
Yeah. And I think for me, another thing this speaks to is that sort of lie that modern society takes as the fundamental gospel, really, is that without self-actualization, without being able to follow the every whim of the will, that you're not being that you're not being authentic, but or at least other people. So for example, the sort of old-fashioned sort of idea that you might be able to love a sinner but hate a sin is still it's not allowed within this idea, because the whole point is that what people desire is in the 21st century such a core part of their personality, but to deny it is to deny them. And this linking back round to Augustine is a problem, because we're meant to desire God in that way, and in that case it would be true, because to desire God with all your heart, soul, and mind, which is the sort of end of Christianity, so to speak, the what you want and the means as well, both of them, is to deny that would be to deny someone's selfhood. But because people have swapped truth, which is God, with a lie, then and put a creature in that place, and certainly the desires that are creaturely, fleshly, Paul would probably call them, then they mistake authenticity for a lie, and that's what Paul says here. They exchange truth for a lie.
And I think what we often see in that is the kickback that often any criticism of that way of thinking, say, for instance, the kind of woke ideological tropes that we see, that to kind of even cough at those is to get ad hominem attacks, isn't it? Because it's felt as if we are ripping into their kind of core self.
Yeah. Well, you get
this violent reaction back at it, which we've all become sort of very aware of.
Yeah, I was going to say it's this this value of freedom of choice, which is the paramount value in our culture, and you see it with the pro-choice movement. I mean, if you think about it, the whole notion of just having a choice just for the sake of it is kind of empty. I mean, a choice, the value of a choice is dictated by the content of the choice that you make. Just having a choice in itself is not really a value with any substance, if you think about it, because you can choose to do anything. It's just a free floating idea that we should have a sort of unrestrained ability to make a spontaneous decision without any kind of influence, which is absurd when you think about it.
Terry Pratchett pokes fun at this in one of his books. Now, Terry Pratchett, of course, was an atheist and a humanist, but a very clever one. I don't know if either of you read many Terry Pratchett books. Have you? No. Okay. And he pokes fun at this because one character demands of another the right to freedom, and the other one basically points out that the apes are free, up their trees slinging shit at each other. That's freedom. We're constantly constrained by something more than that to become something more than that. Freedom as an end in itself is meaningless. What are we free to do? That's a different thing entirely. That's a different question.
But this is what happens when a culture moves away from its Judeo-Christian roots. It forgets its scholastic heritage. It doesn't have any fluency to be able to have the kind of conversation that we're having now. Everything becomes emotive and emotivism, and it's just a sort of a bleating of rhetoric. And in the end, it's about power, isn't it? It's about, you're in denying me this, or in arguing against this, you're denying me this. So you're trying to overpower me, rather than what I hope in all three of us's heart is instead we're trying to propose, a loving way to live your life.
It's never loving to leave someone in a lie. That's a
yeah. Just one difference between us and the scholastics is that there was probably less obscene language with the scholastics. So
are we obscene? I don't know.
I'm just joking, Tom. Apologies to any under 18 listeners. It's okay, Tom. I'm sure we can get away with one expletive. You have that in PG.
If Paul can use it,
you have that in PGs nowadays, don't you? No, that's good. We should move on. So to the first story of the week, which I found quite funny, actually. Women cannot be born with a penis, Boris Johnson has said. It's quite remarkable. You just stop there and you think, it's amazing that this is a headline story in the Telegraph, isn't it? Women cannot be born with a penis. The Prime Minister says he sees no reason to dissent from a ruling by World Swimming that bars any trans athletes who have reached male puberty from competing in women's events. Asked whether a woman can be born with a penis, Mr. Johnson said, not without being a man. So that clarifies That clarifies the situation no end. I think that's the end of it, basically, isn't it? I think is that the end of the conversation now?
I doubt it, if only.
This will go on and on.
The problem is that sometimes, I mean, Boris Johnson's a bit random, isn't he? He's slightly random as to whether he's talking Skubala or whether he's talking sense. Is it all right to swear in Greek?
Yeah, that's fine.
St. Paul used it.
That's fine.
There'll be filters.
Underage.
YouTube will censor us once again.
Greek
swearing. And, we apologise to New Testament Greek scholars, by the way.
It's Philippians 3:8. By the way, yeah, I mean, he's been so back and forward on this. I suspect it kind of really just depends on how recently he's spoken to Carrie, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah, I think it depends. It depends on his on who he thinks he's going to appeal to by saying these kind of things.
Well, exactly. He's sort of he's all things to all people, but not in the positive way that Paul was talking.
Fair weather friend.
Well, because Paul isn't talking when he said that. Paul's not talking about having no morals, scruples, or a foundation of our concepts of what who we are.
He's not just saying say whatever
gets your way.
Hear to curry favor with them, is he?
No. He's saying be, I mean, contextual as our scholar of contextual mission would say. He's talking about using where people are to talk to them about your truth rather than sort of just floating around at random. Yeah, well, it's good to know. I mean, Boris Johnson knows quite a lot about women, I suspect, over the years, and he's presumably something of an expert in
whether or not women can have penises. It's good. So the other thing I thought it'd be good to discuss at the top of the show was this extraordinary video that Jeremy Vine released. I think he must have sent it into the Jeremy Vine show. Have you seen this?
No, go on.
He's on his deathbed, isn't he? With this dreaded COVID.
He has COVID apparently, and he's got a positive test. So let's say he's got COVID, and he's kind of put I assume it's his phone, sort of on the far side of his sofa, and he's lying on his front with a cushion in front of his face, sort of pretending to be unwell. And then, do you want to listen to? I'll play a little clip just for we'll just listen to it because we don't really have any technology on the show, and we can see what we make of. Oh no, there's an advertisement. There's an advertisement.
Jeremy.
You can see how terribly unprofessional this show is, can't you? Anyway, I'm just waiting for the advert to finish. But he's basically sort of, it's like, when you're a child and you ring up the school, when you're sort of playing truant and you're sort of pretending to be unwell with this sort of fake, they say, I'm awfully sorry. And you sort of, trying to make yourself sound as sad as possible.
Yeah.
But actually you're not sad at all because you're about to get a day off school. Not that I ever did that. Here we go.
Yeah.
He closes his eyes every once in a while.
So I'm in bed with COVID. Previously, years gone by, I would have come into work with this. You can walk, you can work. Obviously, that's not possible now. Going by our show, out of the presenters, 100% of our presenters have got it. That means there must be a lot of it about. Why isn't the government mentioning it? Why isn't the government saying?
Why isn't the government mentioning it? Oh man, come on now.
It's also worth mentioning that when he says 100% of our presenters have got it, they show a picture of one other person. So if there are two people, one of them might probably had it and gave it to the other one, right? It's not the most scientific.
I love it. Like, let's just extrapolate from this sample group of the 3 people I know in my team to everywhere. Like 100% of our presenters have got it. Therefore, 100% of Britain must have it. Must be a lot of it about.
There's another video here which says apparently he tested positive for COVID over Christmas as well, which was only 6 months ago.
Well, someone was pointing out that there seems to be a sort of a cycle now of boosting people. Then they get the boosters wane off because they get worse after about 12 weeks, and then you get another wave. I mean, the question is, well, I think Claire Craig pointed out, are we just in an endless cycle of jabbing people, then getting infections sort of 5 months later, and then another wave of jabs to counter it, and then they wear
I could when I click, I'm on the Daily Mail website looking at this, and there are 2 out of 4 videos which are recommended where Jeremy Vine is saying he's got COVID at other times. So now he's had it at Christmas, and then there's another video saying Jeremy Vine reveals he's still testing positive for COVID. It's like he can't possibly, escape COVID.
And is he calling for like return to masks? And
yeah. So he's saying, "Oh, why isn't the government doing?" Basically, this video is like his argument is, "Oh, I'm so unwell. I can't believe the government didn't tell me not to go outside because now I've got COVID. I've got this cough and I'm lying here so unwell and so like a sleeping puppy."
The best bit is when he goes, "I've got a cough."
Yeah.
Which is definitely what you do when you're on the phone to your employer, aren't you? I've got a cough.
It's probably the worst acting since Matt Hancock pretended to cry over the vaccine rollout. Tom, didn't you say though that? I mean, there are fresh calls, aren't there?
There are fresh calls. The Guardian have had a leader by Francis Ryan, who is a journalist apparently. A few small changes will make a big difference to millions of vulnerable people, he says. And he wants,
Are those changes that we should lock everyone in the country up for 6 months?
No, he's not called for that yet, and I'm sure that will come. He's asking for masks, really useful measure that, and testing, because the country's got loads of money and can afford to spend another few £billion without any trouble. And sort of mandated sort of working from home if you're positive, or mandated isolation. Now, which is again, can we really afford to keep doing this? I don't think we can. It destroys industries. We found that during a wave, it destroys industries, which is because most people are kind of absolutely fine just at home, aren't they?
And it must destroy our natural immunity. We need bugs. We all need to interact with each other.
You're sounding like a dangerous conspiracy theory now, Daniel.
Yeah. So I had this feeling that society was actually about people mixing, and what have you. But
I think the idea that those who are vulnerable must keep. I'm just really sad because there are vulnerable people, and I understand their concerns, right? Obviously I understand their concerns, but they've been vulnerable for a lot of them. It's not a new thing, but they, some of them are only just re-emerging now to be hit with a wave of fear propaganda, and to go away again. What sort of quality of life is sort of would it be to be sort of requested to isolate for sort of 8 months of a year? With brief periods where you might just poke your head up back into society before demanding that you go back in again. It's not kind. It's not actually good for them. I can't speak for all of them, but I don't think it would be good for me, certainly if I was vulnerable, to be locked away for 8 months of a year in order to avoid every single bug.
Reading this piece, Tom, it's like it reminds me of when you read anything in the Guardian, but just generally these kind of metropolitan elites talking about a reality that I just don't recognize in the world and in people's lives. When she's going on about, we need to have loads of people haven't had a 4th COVID jab and everyone's getting sick over and over again. And I don't want to be writing this, but we have to recognize the reality and blah, blah, blah. I mean, in my just everyday life, people, I work with and all that kind of stuff, I don't know anybody who's unwell with COVID, and I haven't known anyone who's unwell with it for months, I would say. And nobody that I know really wears a mask anymore. Lots of people have been vaccinated. Lots of people haven't. But I just don't see any of it. I just don't see any of this. This is not reality.
This paragraph where it says...
I think it's a woman, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
She looks very... She's got a photo, but she looks very upset.
Frances, right. Okay.
Very upset with the UK government.
This is what she says then. There will be few greater casualties, though, than the 3.7 million clinically extremely vulnerable people, especially the 500,000 who are immunocompromised and can't get much or any benefit from a booster jab. Trying to avoid the virus in a country that's forgone all safety measures means risking your life when you pop to the shops. Ministers who are content for repeated coronavirus infection to just become part of British life, like every other illness ever,
and any kind of hazardous,
just to say,
aspect of reality.
Are content for isolation to be part of clinically vulnerable peoples. But I mean, what's her suggestion? Because we know that. I mean, maybe she believes that masks and testing actually work, but we know they don't, because we had a massive wave with masks and testing. Yep. We really did, and isolation, and then we had another massive wave that came and went with just as much without.
Her suggestion is just masks, isn't it? At the end, basically, this is mask propaganda. This piece, that's what she's saying.
But I mean, but it's the tyranny of safetyism, isn't it? But there's clearly within that constituency a group of people for whom this is something that they want to promote. It's part of their worldview. There's this whole load of virtue signalling that comes from it. And for ordinary people who have to get on with life, this is a completely different reality.
Yeah. Yep.
I just think there are people who liked the lockdowns, who liked the whole COVID theatre, and they miss it.
Yeah, they're ideologically committed to this, because this is, partly this is about bashing the Tory government, but also it's about, as you say, Daniel, it's about virtue signaling, because it's an opportunity to say, I care about clinically vulnerable people and nobody else does. And why isn't the government doing something about it? So it's simultaneously doing that and sort of promoting a vision of the state as the savior of society. So you can't solve this on a local or individual level. It has to be the state. The state has to be the one to offer a solution to it. So it's a thoroughly ideological position, and that's what I'm saying. It doesn't really relate to anything in reality. Just like Jeremy Vine's not really unwell. I mean, he's obviously got a cold. Say obviously, it's not obvious at all when you look at him, because if you just look at his face, the only thing that indicates that he's unwell is that he's sort of doing some crinkly thing with his eyebrows. He doesn't look unwell, and he doesn't seem particularly unwell. And if that's the price that we pay for having a society in which we're not tyrannized over by a COVID regime, then I think although the video in itself is quite distressing to watch, I think it's quite a low price to pay, really.
But the thing with the branch Covidian metropolitan elite types is that they are financially cushioned enough from this.
They won't be for very long.
Yeah, they won't be for very long.
When the economy crashes.
To not feel it at the moment. That if you have to choose between bread and butter issues, between actually feeding your children and getting out, or being in a perpetual furlough, lockdown, work from home, masked, etc. I just think it actually, this whole thing in the last 2 years showed that division within society, just as Brexit and Remain did, that there's the differences are actually widening.
Yeah, and there's an irony there, isn't it? Because this is ostensibly, articles like these are ostensibly written, in favour of or speaking up for the marginalised and vulnerable and so on. But really, it takes no account of the socioeconomic reality of the working class or immigrant classes or any kind of marginalised class, really, because they're the ones who suffer when society is locked down and, they can't work, they can't open their businesses. Many of them are on sort of, 0 hours contracts or minimum wage jobs, so they're paid by the hour or whatever it might be. So it's just a completely different world, and I think these people are quite out of touch. But we should move on, chaps, to the big story of the week, which comes to us from the US, which is clearly the majority ruling in the Supreme Court, which struck down Roe versus Wade, 50-year-old ruling, which is finally overturned. Now, it's good to just be technically correct about what's happened. Basically, there was a federal there, up until this point, for the last 50 years, as a result of Roe v. Wade, there was a federal constitutional right to abortion, which was guaranteed to all Americans. Now, as I understand it, I think that constitutional right applied to abortion at any point during a pregnancy. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what I heard about it. So please correct me if I'm wrong. But essentially what's happened with Roe v. Wade is because it's been overturned on the basis that the Constitution doesn't guarantee a right to abortion, which it clearly doesn't, it is now the states who are going to make up their mind individually as to what their laws about abortion should be. So regardless of what anyone else says about this, it is a more democratic situation, because now the people will have a role in determining what states' laws on abortions are, and it's not just made up. The situation is not just determined for the people on the basis of what the Supreme Court says, because of course the Supreme Court justices are not elected democratically, although they are appointed by democratically elected leaders. So it is a more democratic situation in that sense. So that's technically what's happened. Go on, Tom.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely what's happened. I mean, the ruling for Roe versus Wade was one of a number of quite what you might call activist rulings by judges in that time. And I think the reasoning is particularly thin. It's something like there's a right to privacy, so therefore there's a right to contraceptive, and then because in order to enforce a ban on contraceptives, you'd need to breach the right to privacy, which was then basically applied straight onto abortion, which as if there was no other sort of. So I believe the Chief Justice or one of the justices, at least, I don't know if there is a Chief Justice, has said that some of those others should be revisited as well, because there's no right to access to contraceptives in the Constitution. That's not what the Constitution says. It simply says you have a right to privacy, which is different. So you can't just sort of through judicial activism expand a right to mean something that's not there. That's not the point of a constitutional democracy. So purely objectively, and I think this has been accepted by a number of even pro-abortion campaigners over the years, the ruling on Roe versus Wade was wrong, and therefore is right to have stopped it purely objectively.
But that's not the way it's being seen. Obviously, in the culture, it's being seen as an assault on women's rights. I mean, obviously, we don't want to sort of just talk about this in the abstract, because it's very easy to kind of have another sort of general conversation about our view on abortion. I think we've made it very clear what we think about it. One of the things which I found very interesting was the reaction of certain people in the US calling for, well, in New York in particular, calling for a sex strike, which is basically, I don't know what this sort of group is that's behind this, but essentially it's a group of feminists responding to Roe versus Wade by saying, well, if you're going to take away our constitutional right for abortion, we're going to stop having sex with men, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because it's a kind of puritanical reaction to the ruling. I mean, in New York, I think New York allows abortion pretty much up to term anyway. Yeah. But it's interesting that the response is that we won't have sex, which is kind of, I mean, it's not exactly the same view as a Christian view, but it's not too far away, which is to say that a man shouldn't have sex with a woman unless he's prepared to take responsibility for
through the institution of holy matrimony.
Through that's fun, isn't it? How things are almost going full circle. It's a return to chastity. It's
so sort of clear what they're saying. It's almost unbelievable. Because SCOTUS overturned Roe v. Wade, we cannot take the risk of an unintended pregnancy. Therefore, we will not have sex with any man, including our husbands, unless we are trying to become pregnant. I mean, that's like almost a Roman Catholic view of sex. It's not exactly, because they wouldn't quite put it like that, but that's essentially what they're saying. If so, the Roman Catholic position would be, you have sex, and it's wrong within the sexual act to foreclose the possibility of conception using contraception, right? So that's the position. It's like, so the sexual act, each and every sexual act should be open in principle to conception, and you should not do something that makes conception any less likely, because the sexual act is intrinsically tied to reproduction. Now, the Anglican view is a little bit more it's a little bit it's a little bit more nuanced, but nevertheless there is still the link between reproduction and
we say
the matrimonial act in the Book of Common Prayer,
and even in
the of marriage. Sorry, Tom.
Even in the common worship,
common worship is a bit more fuzzy though, isn't it?
Anyway, the light and tenderness of sexual union is intrinsically linked with the bringing up of children.
Exactly. But the point I'm making here is that to say we will not have sex with any man unless we are trying to become pregnant is kind of astonishing, isn't it? And in my view, I'd say, well, I completely support them in their decision. I think that will make things a hell of a lot better for absolutely everybody. And the thing is, when you say this to people, they think it's like the most outrageous thing that you could possibly say. But they're just saying it themselves. They're saying, we don't want to get in a situation where we've got an unwanted pregnancy, so we won't have sex. And you think, well, yes, of course. Just if you don't want to have a child, don't have sex. I mean, just don't get yourself in a position where you need to have an abortion. Don't have sex in the first place. And this is all said, with the caveat that I think it's very, very important to be compassionate to people who are in that situation, and they didn't mean to be, and now they regret the situation they're in, and so on and so forth. And that's a very difficult position for lots of women. But this is sense these feminists are talking here.
No, absolutely.
It's funny, isn't it, how the puritanical streak is emerging, because during the first lockdown, particularly, wasn't it, that in essence the government banned extramarital sex.
Yeah.
You couldn't have
unless it was with a colleague. Unless it was with a colleague, Daniel, in which case it was fine. yeah.
I mean, I would say obviously that Paul's sort of command is to, within a marriage, not to deprive each other, except for to put aside mutual consent and for a time so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. That's 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So, that's the only thing I would disagree with in what they're saying is if you are married, then you shouldn't forego marital intercourse unless. Unless.
Well, I mean, Tom, I hear what you're saying. I can see a reason pastorally, particularly if you're a Roman Catholic, why you would forego intercourse. If you had some medical problem or something like that, and you didn't want to conceive, and you felt that it was wrong to use contraception, but perhaps we're getting into sort of minutiae, which feminists did not intend. The thing it reminds me of is the Me Too stuff. Because that stuff was also about male chastity, wasn't it? It was about men should not be going out touching women's bottoms and molesting women because obviously it's wrong and it's harassment and everything. And what men should do is control themselves. So you should control your desires, control those urges which you have, because you're offending and harassing women. And again, it's a thoroughly Christian intuition, which is that men do have a far higher sexual drive than women, and men are more physically imposing and powerful, and therefore what men need to do is to learn how to control themselves and to channel those drives in a virtuous way. The problem is that for the last 60 years our culture has been telling men to do exactly the opposite, which is just to let their sexual inclinations run free, and this has the effect of exacerbating that desire. It's like gluttony or a drug addiction or something like that. It it feeds on itself and it exacerbates itself. And the more you sort of give, the more you give license to those urges, the more those urges rule over you and get out of control. And that's why men do these terrible things, is because they've never learned or been told or made any serious effort to exercise self-control. And so we told people to do that for decades, and then we're sort of shocked when men behave like this. Anyway,
once again, Romans 1, isn't it? Therefore, God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. That works just as much in heterosexual illicit relationships as it does out of it. Paul was there. It's not exactly rocket science that if we let a society sort of basically put aside God and follow their own desires instead, that this is where it happened, because it had already happened in Paul's time. It was happening amongst the Gentiles that he saw.
Tom Holland says in Dominion, great book if you haven't read it, folks, but he says I think it's in the last chapter that which looks at the whole kind of identity politics and wokeness, that clearly people are trying to return to some threads of Christianity. It may be a sort of a heretical form, but Me Too has got some of those nuances that are.
What it doesn't have is redemption.
Yeah, exactly. But a few months ago, wasn't it? I think we commented on how that there is this new trend for people to celebrate a commitment to each other before they have a physical relationship, and that they might have some kind of ceremony and exchange of tokens. And then you actually say, well, actually, isn't that marriage? As they're reading poems to each other about how they're going to love each other for the rest of their lives and never be apart, and so on and so on. Here's an object that I'm going to give you, a piece of jewelry. Think, well, so just reinventing the wheel, but fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? It's the wisdom of God being sort of fumbled around for by people who reject everything to do with our Christian heritage. It's quite amazing. I have to confess, chaps, I haven't done loads and loads of research on this, but I was looking around for some Christian response to this situation. I haven't seen anything at all from Church of England's official sources, which I don't know if you chaps have seen it, but I think we said we couldn't find anything, didn't we? Which is kind of, it's a real shame that we haven't heard anything from any bishops or anything from the Church of England. I mean, this is clearly a big story. We were saying, weren't we, there's been a debate in Parliament as to, I'm not really sure how this would happen, but Stella Creasy, the Labour MP, has been talking about how there should be a right to abortion in the British Bill of Rights, sort of question over what that actually means. But it's big news in our country, and we haven't heard anything at all from the church about it.
And what was shocking about that debate in Parliament was the way that those from a pro-life position, which I have to say, I only saw it on the government side, the benches, were being shouted down, booed down. And I thought we had this thing that in Parliament, sensitive subjects like this were dealt with in a non-partisan, philosophical, kind of senatorial manner, rather than shouting matches.
But you forget, Daniel, that our current parliamentarians are amongst the worst that have ever stood up in that chamber. They're genuinely awful. The caliber of MPs is absolutely dreadful. But,
at one point, one MP was saying, well, we've got to consider that it's not only the woman's body, but there is another body, another person that is involved in this process. another body that is being carried, and he's being shouted down with,
Yeah.
no, it isn't. Shame on you. Shut up. Bigot and all that. I just thought this is really, really poor.
That's the thing about this the pro-abortion arguments is they never ever want to reckon with the fact that there is another body, there is another life involved in abortions. So I did find this interesting article, which was written by a pro-choice Christian called Laura Ellis, and I thought it was going to contain some actual arguments in it. So it's called "Why I'm a Pro-Choice Christian and Believe You Should Be Too." But the article is, I'll put it on the show notes. What it is it's a reiteration of the kind of rhetorical tropes of the pro-choice movement, and then it's a guilt by association argument, which is saying that the religious right originally was formed in order to support segregation in the mid-20th century in the US, and therefore it's tainted. And it's not really about being pro-life at all, but it's actually about it's a power grab, essentially. That's her argument. There's no argument here. There's no theological argument. There's no philosophical argument. It's just trash. This article is just trash. There's no substance in it whatsoever. She's also cited in an article on CNN where you've got Trent Horn, who's a Roman Catholic, giving fairly straight answers to this question. Again, for example, when he's asked to cite biblical passages, he says the Bible doesn't explicitly mention abortion, but it does say in various places that it's wrong to kill innocent human beings. And he cites verses from Exodus and Proverbs, for example. And then he makes a logical argument, which is that if the Bible says it's wrong to kill innocent human beings, and science and sound reasoning tell us that human embryos and human fetuses are human beings, then the Bible implies that it's wrong to kill them. So that is a biblical argument. And her response is, well, this is really complicated, and we can't justify it through a single verse. The Bible's an incredibly complicated book written by many people over different historical and social contexts, and it'd be wrong to just pull out bits and pieces of it and apply it to 21st century America. It doesn't talk about abortion in any way. It's just not there. So and then she said, when I think about the kind of scriptures that people who are anti-abortion pull out, they're often about murder, sexual immorality, and blaming women. They're so taken out of context. I fall back to drawing from the life and ministry of Christ. Jesus really advocated for women in a beautiful, unique way, etc., as though Jesus would advocate for abortion because he treated women respectfully. The fact is that,
and that's the line, isn't it? Where.
Yeah.
If there are two demonstrations, which seriously do you think, on which side of the road is Christ going to be on?
Yeah. And the thing is, as well, just to make a scriptural point, is that Scripture does make, by implication, comments about abortion, or it does reference abortion, because it describes an unborn child as a brephos, which is the same word as it uses for a child that's been born. So the authors don't have a distinction in their mind between a born child and a fetus.
And there's plenty of verses in the Psalms and elsewhere which describe God as creating us from our mother's wombs.
Psalm 139.
Yeah.
You knit me together in my mother's womb. It's unconscionable that you could look at a verse like that and think that it somehow doesn't imply that to destroy a child in the womb is wrong. If God knits children together in their mother's womb, I mean, I don't want to be too graphic, but certain types of abortion literally dismember children, limb from limb. It's literally the opposite of the work of God in creating children. So,
and I think when I've seen on the Anglo Twitter sphere various clergy, sort of falling over themselves to say, oh well, I'm actually pro-choice. Though I think abortion's a bad thing, I think in the end it's all about choice, and that they live often in this very sort of bubble existence where the graphic nature of this is not to be discussed because somehow it's distasteful.
But also, I mean, that's not how our moral system works. I mean, maybe maybe one day in heaven we won't need, well, certainly we won't need a law to tell us what's right and what's wrong. But actually, not everyone is in the kingdom of God yet, and there are people who do things that are wrong, and and so therefore it's been considered to be correct to constrain people from doing wrong things by means of law, for as long as there's been a state. So it just boggles that the mind boggles that this person can claim that it's a neutral thing in the Bible. Also, I mean, the other very good argument. It's always a very good argument because it's very, Christianity has uniquely amongst Christian religions at the time been anti-abortion. All the other religions didn't care at that point, other than Judaism, as I understand it. But Roman, Greek, all the other Middle Eastern and Eastern European religions that were around at that time in the ancient world were quite happy to have abortion. They even had a plant that did it. They knew how to do it herbally, and they were in fact generally infanticide was allowed as well. This was something,
exposure of infants.
This was something that Christians fought against from the very earliest days, and it's only recently that anyone has tried to make any sort of coherent argument the opposite. So it's really
a tour of the catacombs, isn't it? In Rome, will show you lots of tiny little sort of tombs for children who the Christians collected, who'd been dumped on the streets. Either they were the wrong sex or what have you, born out of some kind of misery, and were just discarded, sadly. And they would give them a dignified rest. And so the catacombs had loads of these honeycomb little tombs for babies. And I believe, I can't remember which and commentator is in antiquity, it might be Josephus, who claimed that the Christians were thought to have been collecting babies because they were eating flesh. And see, there was this confusion between that and the Eucharist.
It's very true. One thing I was going to say, I've heard a couple of commentators, conservatives who are not Christians, saying that, Toby Young said this, for example, and I've heard other people saying it as well, that abortion should be a right, or it should at least be accessible up to a certain point, and that women's rights need to be balanced against the life of the child, and that should be based on development of the child. I just wanted to say that I think that that's such a philosophically vacuous argument in a number of ways. The first thing I say about it is that there is absolutely no way, apart from some completely arbitrary criteria, of determining when the child becomes a person, or when it becomes a life which should be respected. There's no way of determining that scientifically, ethically, morally at all. The only point is a conception or not at all, that makes any logical sense. And then the second thing is that the argument is completely wrong. It's completely the opposite of the way things work. If you are unsure as to whether something is a human being, you don't kill it. It's not that if there's any doubt, you kill it. That's a completely ridiculous way of thinking about the right to terminate a life. So this is why you don't, we don't have, thank goodness, we don't have legal euthanasia in our country, because we still recognize that people who, for example, have degenerative neurological illnesses are still human beings. They may be impaired in terms of their cognitive function, but that doesn't make them not a person. And because there is that doubt, at least in most people's minds, as to whether they are less than a person, they're not killed. And it's exactly the same thing for children in the womb, only it's a much stronger argument than that, is that you cannot say with any certainty whatsoever that a child in the womb is not a person. So you can't kill them. It's just straightforward. It's a reason not to kill them, not a reason to kill them. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, what I just want to say is, like, I know there are people who are conservative who listen to this, and I just want to put that to them, that argument doesn't make any sense. It lacks coherence, and it's not a courageous argument. You can be totally against abortion from a secular perspective on that basis, on the basis that you believe in a right to life. The entity in the womb is at least ambiguously a life, and therefore its life should be respected. There is no way of determining, 3 months or whatever. It just doesn't make any sense. It's just, do you see what I mean? Anyway, yeah, we've got a couple of other things that we need to talk about.
I think we can do the next one quite quickly, couldn't we? Because this absurd idea that Britain should prepare for war with Russia, from the head of the armed forces.
This is really worrying, Tom.
It's very worrying, but it's also completely absurd. I mean, the obvious problem being that the strategy of the West in the Ukrainian crisis, the Ukrainian war, is failing. Russia appear to have made their land bridge to the Crimea. They have cut off Ukraine from the sea. They have got most of the Donbass region. This is, as far as I can tell, what has happened. It's even floated through in the mainstream press. And the only way that they would ever, reasonably be gotten out of those positions is for not just arms and training, because training takes months. I'm not quite sure, but actual military commitment from the West to drive Russia out of Ukraine, and the idea that that's a coherent and likely and even a positive thing, which this chap seems to think, is incredibly dangerous. They are a nuclear armed power. They are a nuclear armed power with hypersonic nuclear missiles that are capable of evading our nuclear defenses. Everyone is aware of that. We do not escalate. We do not prepare for an escalation.
My question, Tom, reading this is why. So the argument is Britain must be prepared to go to war with Russia. But my simple question I'm asking is why? Why? I mean, why would we go to war with Russia? What for? I mean, do you see an answer to that question in this article?
No.
I mean, honestly, what is he saying? He's saying, well, Russians are saying aggressive things like there've been talks. They've been talking about how, they've been threatening the population of Lithuania following a dispute over access to the Russian enclave of Kaliningrad. But so what? I mean, I'm sure that's an important thing for Lithuanians, but that's not a reason to start World War III. Mr. Patrushev, a former head of Russia's Federal Security Service, didn't specify what action he had in mind, but he did indicate that he wouldn't tolerate Vilnius's recent decision, ban future shipments of steel and iron ore to Kaliningrad. But I mean,
in all of this, don't you think there's a danger of a kind of Hollywoodization or marvelization of reality, where we think that it's all just simply a case of hoping that we've got enough superpowers, and every story must have a good ending. It's like World War I, isn't it? It'll all be over by Christmas, because that's the way that the Victorian Edwardian mind thought that things happened.
He just said that, hasn't he, Daniel? He said that it's a 1937 moment. He's literally saying, it's like the beginning of World War II. Sorry, carry on.
Well, I think it's actually better to say it's more like a 1914 moment, where we could end up in a conflict that goes on for years and years and years, or a conflict that lasts 10 minutes. But in either case, a conflict where we didn't see it coming before. Whereas I think 1937, 38, we did see a lot of things coming.
Well, arguably, 1937. The Second World War is arguably a resumption of the hostilities of the First World War due to a flawed peace process that sought damages rather than reconciliation. I mean, there's an argument for that. It's not the whole story, but there's an argument for that.
Yeah.
And no one thinks the world really needed to fight the First World War.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Tom. I'm not sure I agree with that. but I don't think necessarily it's right to necessarily go into that in detail. But there is a very good argument for it in Nigel Bigger's book In Defense of War, which I must say I found quite persuasive. But I'm not a military history expert. Just putting that out there for all those fans of World War One who listen to the show. I mean, I think I find this seriously concerning when you've got people like this talking about, he's talking about everybody in the army being ready, from the youngest lance corporal right up to the top of the high chain of command. He's talking about reviving traditional forms of battlefield engagement, hand-to-hand combat, close like short range combat, all that kind of stuff. It's very worrying, and I think I cannot see why this is necessary. Speaking of which, chaps, we did actually forget to talk about something in the abortion thing, which does relate to this, which is the outrageous politicization of the Glastonbury festival.
I know, that's deeply demonic, isn't it?
I mean, so the way it relates is that Paul McCartney decided to sort of saunter around the stage at the end of his set with a massive Ukrainian flag for some reason, and of course the other thing which was shocking in the extreme was Kendrick Lamar's denouement to his set, where he wore a crown of thorns with diamonds encrusted in it, and had blood spewing out. Well, I don't know where the blood was coming from, but it was kind of running down his face, and he was apparently making some kind of protest statement against Roe v. Wade, and he said, "Judge me, judge Christ." And then what did he say? Something like freedom for women or something like that. But just Glastonbury, I mean, I've never really followed Glastonbury. I've never been there myself, but it just sounds appalling in every way. Have either of you guys ever gone to it?
No.
I've been to the Anglo-Catholic thing once afterwards.
Oh, really? What's that?
They have a sort of a large gathering of sort of Southwest forward in faith, and I mean that was years and years ago, and Anglo-Catholics, and I mean they had Robert Runcie. I think the one I went to years ago had Robert Runcie presiding at it, and George Carey preaching. Gosh, that's pretty much time. That's about 30 odd years ago.
All right. Okay.
But it was all smells and bells and what have you.
Yeah.
And it was done just after the festival.
Okay, I didn't know that.
And as you know, they get like several thousand people in the ruins of the abbey.
Oh, lovely. Sounds good.
But
they need that nowadays. You'd have to do. It could be like a kind of I don't know, perform an exorcism or something. They also had Zelensky, of course, and Greta Thunberg. So sounds fun, man.
I cannot wait to go there.
Yeah. So
I think it's over, Tom.
You have to get your tickets for next year. They cost something like
you could have an Irreverend stand in Glastonbury.
Yeah, they cost something like 1,200 quid. I'm sure we'd be welcomed with open arms, Daniel, to Glastonbury. I'm sure people would be thrilled, absolutely thrilled to see us there. In other news, the Oxford Diocese has added to the baptismal vows that it expects new Christians.
Not to the vows. Let's be precise. It's added to the commissioning.
Okay. Do you want to explain, Tom?
What is the commissioning? I've never used it.
So it's at the end of the. It's at the end. I've only ever seen it used at. I've used it myself once when I welcome someone into the Anglican Communion at Easter, and it's also used in the confirmation services. But it's a series of sort of promises you make as you leave on top of the baptism promises about. I mean, it's repeating really what you've done already. I mean, I guess it is a vow, but it's not the baptismal vow. It's not the it's not in with the 6. Do you turn to Christ?
How do you know this, Tom? It doesn't. None of the stuff that I've read specifies this.
It does. It says it here. Well, I know it because I know what he's talking about. It's the with God's help I will bit. Is the commissioning. Here we are. The bishop. We want to warmly commend this question for use in parishes where the commission is used, and of course.
Oh yeah, I see. Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
So it's not quite the baptismal liturgy that they're changing, but it is chucking in something new into a part of the service which only until that point only reflected the baptismal vows, and without any sort of additional information, so to speak.
Yeah, so we should be clear in case people don't know what we're talking about. It's going to be a question involved in the ceremony, which says, "Will you strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth?" Which is
doesn't really mean much, does it? I mean,
well, what does it mean to safeguard the integrity of creation? And what does that mean? What is the integrity of creation?
It's interesting that creation in this, if we take the biblical world view, that the material world is only a very, very small part of creation.
Yeah.
And we often, say, "Oh, I'm into creation." Oh, you're safeguarding hell as well as heaven, and
the demonic powers,
or the demonic and the.
I'm not certain what they mean by the integrity of creation. It's a meaning. It's like they've just.
It doesn't mean anything.
Plucked a load of manager speak, isn't it? I mean,
it's word salad.
It just sounds. It sounds like it means something, but I mean, God is the only thing. It's not a thing, of course. God is the only person who safeguards the integrity of creation. He does that all the time by willing it to continue.
But does creation even have an integrity? I think you could make the argument that creation is fundamentally broken, and that you could describe that as a breakdown of integrity.
Yeah, I don't know. I think
characteristic of what it means to live in a fallen creation, is it? Is that there's?
I think it has. No, I disagree. I think it has echoes
in
of the integrity
rebellion.
of God. It is in rebellion. Yeah.
Well, it depends what you mean by integrity, I suppose. There's a sort of ontological integrity to creation, isn't there? But there's a moral breakdown which you could.
I was assuming they were talking ontologically, but which makes no sense at all, because how am I supposed to safeguard the ontological integrity of creation? I don't know.
If it already exists.
If it already exists, yeah,
it's very hard. And what does it mean? What does it mean also to sustain the life of the earth? I mean, that sounds like a big job to me.
So if a comet comes towards invades into the solar system, it's heading towards Earth. It's also part of creation. Am I supposed to?
But maybe sustaining the life of the earth in that case would be to be like Bruce Willis in Armageddon and get on the spaceship and go up there and drill a hole in it and
we better get into training for astronauting.
Yeah, I preferred the Morgan Freeman film actually.
Really? Oh no, I didn't. No. Although the new film Greenland, yes, I like to call it. That's actually, I think, better than Armageddon and Deep Impact.
Finally, renew the life of the earth. What does that mean? Renew the life of the earth. I mean,
don't know. No idea.
It's a completely meaningless statement. So,
do you not think sometimes with these liturgies that people are having liturgical adventures, writing this stuff?
It's like that awful prayer.
Oh yeah, I know.
All of creation resounds with the silent music of your praise. Sounds ever so poetic. But when you think about it, all of creation resounds. Okay, so it's ringing with the silent music, which doesn't make any sense, of your praise. But there's nowhere in the Bible is God's praise said to be silently musical. I mean, music can't be silent.
Creation isn't silent as well. There's always noise everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. Someone was very pleased with themselves when they wrote that.
I've got two seagulls living up. Very noisy.
Creation's resounding with the silent music of their praise.
It's a very strange one, isn't it?
I can remember years ago going to this thing at Canterbury Cathedral for a celebration of hospital chaplaincy, and the then Bishop of Dover started this liturgy that clearly had been written by some committee, and the opening was, "We gather together," and the response was to each line was, "We come as we are." And I thought, well, how else am I supposed to come? And I can remember the priest next to me having the fit of the giggles. But later on I learned this is a lesson that we kind of play around with the liturgy too much at our peril. I did one of these printed sheets with one of these alternative creeds that you can get from the.
You didn't really.
This was about 10, 15 years ago, and actually, some old boy came and sort of tapped me on the shoulder afterwards and said, don't be springing on us these statements of belief that you're asking us to assent with without giving us time to think about it. He said, because there were all these very nice sentences. It probably was the commission thing that Tom's just talked about. But he says we need time to think about that. And actually, you're asking us to assent to something. And you get this in churches where you think, I could write anything down. And, would people just say a response just because, it'd be uncomfortable not to? I think we've got to kind of see a dignity in the worship and a dignity in the people who are saying it. So I'm kind of a bit adverse now to all this stuff, throwing all this stuff at people.
I must admit,
we're asking you to believe in God, Jesus, and His Holy Spirit, not too much more. That's enough.
I must admit that you're right about baptism. Although they, of course, most baptisms these days, and I've sort of thrown out the leaflets from my church that have this on, use that awful modern. They don't use the Apostles' Creed, which really upsets me, because the Apostles' Creed is literally the baptismal creed of the church. It is the one until about 5 years ago that every single person who had come through, the Anglican Church, and before that the Catholic Church in England, and before that probably the Celtic Church, had the words of the Apostles' Creed read at their baptism, and then some liturgy commission saw fit to remove it at that point, at that sacrament. I must admit, I do use a variant of the creed in one of my services. It's not a variant of the creed; it's a statement of faith. It's and I do use a metricalized version of the creed, which is slightly different, but it's quite good to sing in our children's Eucharist or family's Eucharist. But
I'm sure it's very good, Tom.
It's very good.
The most this isn't a creed, but it reminds me of the New Zealand Anglican Lord's Prayer.
Oh, that's awful.
Oh, no.
This I got it up here. Eternal Spirit, Earth Maker, Pain bearer. I almost slipped into a Kiwi accent then. Life giver, source of all that is and that shall be, Father and Mother of us all, loving God, in whom is heaven. Ooh, in whom is heaven. Wow. The hallowing of your name echo through the universe. I'm not sure this makes grammatical sense.
It's more silent music again, isn't it?
The way of your justice be followed by the peoples of the world. Your heavenly will be done by all created beings. Your commonwealth of peace and freedom. And wait. Your commonwealth of peace and freedom sustain our hope and come on earth. There's sustainability. With the bread we need for today, feed us. In the hurt we absorb from one another, forgive us, etc., etc., etc. Amen. Sorry, Tom, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say, I mean, it's nonsense, isn't it? I mean, whenever they have they used it.
What's wrong with Father and Mother of us all, loving God in whom is heaven? That's what Jesus said, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, quite. And also the giver. I mean, just
pain bearer.
bearer.
It's a strange one to pray to God as pain bearer, isn't it? It's that's passionism, isn't it? The idea that God the Father suffers.
It certainly is, and it sort of traps, as Vinandy points out in his seminal book. Does Christ suffer, or does God suffer? It's a great book, actually.
Can you imagine trying to teach this to children at bedtime? Okay, let's all kneel, and we're going to say, repeat after me. Can you imagine?
Eternal Spirit.
I can't even remember the first line.
Eternal Spirit, Earth Maker, Pain Bearer, Life Giver. It's very good prayer. We should move on. I suspect we might be wearying people's patience with this liturgical chat. The other thing. That's all the news, actually. That's all the news this week. We've got a very important email, which I wanted to read out.
It's a very sad email. It needs to be held in prayer, actually, I think.
So I'm going to read this out. And just to say, guys, I'm just going to use initials for, I've spoken to a lady who sent me this. I'm just going to use initials for the people involved in this. It's quite a long email. So I'm just going to read out most of it. Okay. So, my husband and I have raised our 4 children together. We got together in 2004, then married a year later. Our families joined as I had 2 children, one of whom is B, who's the subject of this email, from my first marriage, and he had 1 son. They also had a daughter in 2011. The biological father of B was an alcoholic and abusive and stopped contact with the children in 2004. When B was 4 and the other child was just 2. So J stepped in as dad to B and R, and we have raised them together in a normal family. We did all the things that you do for their children, your children, give them love, time, invest in their schooling, go out on days out, etc., etc. I know the impact of early childhood trauma and rejection but we hoped that the love and care we gave to children would help. Sorry, my browser's being difficult. Would help to overcome this, and life just seemed normal with our kids who were happy and content. B was always a bubbly, confident little girl, always played with dolls, Barbies, My Little Pony, wore dresses, skirts, as well as trousers, no different to how I'd grown up or other girls who she was with, friends with. B struggled at school with friendships as she got older and went to secondary school, always tended to be a little left out. At times, girls can be cruel, and I do think there was an element of bullying and spitefulness. B also struggled academically, and the educational system, in hindsight, probably didn't suit her learning style. Then in 2003, B was 14, a group called 2BU started to go into her secondary school. I was quite naive back then and didn't realize the impact of this. The group was basically run by a woman who openly told the children she was lesbian, and that this was a support group to help children feel comfortable in their skin, in knowing who they were. I was never told directly by the school about this group, but only heard snippets from B. She became more secretive and started to spend less time with us. Then all of a sudden, out of the blue, she told us she felt she was really a boy. Aside to this, Jay and I had become Christians a few years prior. I was prodigal, but Jay was new to his faith and relationship with God. We knew that God doesn't make mistakes, so we knew that what B was telling us was an untruth, but with particularly horrendous teenage behavior and feeling out of our depth, we probably didn't deal with the situation as well as we could. I was so upset at the time, and there was lots of shouting and arguments. Until I learned to lean on God, I was just making the situation worse, really, by being led by my emotions rather than standing back on the rock and giving God control. The period between B being 14 and 19 was pretty tough, to say the least. After meeting this lady at 2BU, she was put in touch with transgender support groups as well as other LGBT arenas, especially online. She was only 14. She was way too young to be dealing with these things. B would fluctuate, sometimes weekly, sometimes even daily, as to who or what she identified as. She's named herself transgender, non-binary, lesbian, pansexual, asexual, bisexual, monosexual, straight, etc., just to name a few. She'd often have to Google terms to explain them when questioned, as she didn't even have an understanding herself, even though this was something she claimed to identify as. The culture at school changed, and all of a sudden it seemed that everyone seemed to have a label. If it wasn't something to do with gender and sexuality, that it was something to do with mental health, like anxiety or depression. It was perceived as cool or the new fad. B would dress in male clothes, causing issues with her brothers as she would shop in the same clothes shops as them on purpose. She would lower her voice to sound monotone, as she would try to sound as male as possible. She, unknown to us, bought a binder which basically compressed her chest to hide the fact that she was female. She would try to bring her transgender identity issues into conversations at all time. It was like an obsession that she couldn't think of anything else. It was all consuming to her. My husband and I would pray together. I met other Christian ladies to pray. We would pray at home, fill the house with worship music. And I even prayed over B while she was asleep. She spoke of, quote, a voice telling her she was a boy. So we prayed against the demonic and things improved for a while. She even said the voice had gone, but then a few months later, it got even worse and she became so hostile towards us, and especially towards our relationship with God. Now I understand the danger of deliverance when the person you are praying for does not have the Holy Spirit to fill them. Becca started to get friends and people I knew in our village to call her Nathan instead of B. I never knew who she'd spoken to, who was going along with it and calling her by a boy's name. I even had friends who would tell me that I should be accepting of it and just go along with it. However, we know that God is sovereign, that he created her in his image and that he does not make mistakes. Apart from the first year where we made plenty of mistakes, I feel that our approach has been consistent. Through lots of prayer, God-given wisdom and discernment, I feel that we have been boundaried but consistent in how we've spoken to B. The turning point for me was when I heard God tell me it will be put right. I trust God completely, and I know one day in his timing it will be put right, and B will come to know the truth and accept the body God gave her. We have offered her love and friendship, but have not swayed in the fact that she, to us, is female. We fully acknowledge that she has thoughts and feelings that tell her she is in the wrong body. However, we stand firm that these thoughts are not truth for who she really is. We will not call her by a boy's name as she demands, or refer to her as him or they. Then when B approached her 19th birthday, we found out that she was trying to groom / manipulate / coach her younger sister, who was only 7 at the time, about gender / drag queen sexuality. Things became so bad at home that when my husband and I could hardly bear to be in the house, the atmosphere was awful, so heavy, and we felt we couldn't leave their younger daughter even in another room while B was around. After prayer and talking it all through, we knew we had to honor God first and protect Elle, our younger daughter. All that we have belongs to God. Nothing is ours that he hasn't blessed us with. Yet we were allowing the enemy to have a foothold in our home through our eldest daughter. We sat down with her. She told us that she was really a boy, that she was going to put herself on the list for transgender surgery, that she demanded we accept her name change and needed to stop being transphobic. We explained the reasons why we couldn't support any of this again, and that as she wanted to make grown-up decisions about her life and body, that she would have to be a grown-up, stand on her own 2 feet and move out. We supported her to find a lovely room to rent in the next village and set her up with everything she needed. But to this day, she believes we kicked her out. She doesn't accept her actions led to her being told to move out. So she moved out a few years ago. Within a month, she started having a relationship with a man she'd known for a while. They ended up moving in. We saw them every couple of months. He was a straight man. She seemed more feminine, and they told us they were a straight couple, although she did still say she had mixed feelings about who she was. But a month or two before this, she was adamant she was male and was going in for transgender surgery. All that was put on the back burner. We would not have chosen her to have lived with someone casually. However, she has never committed her life to Christ and was very much living in the world. In 2019, she fell pregnant despite mine and my husband's assurances that we would support her in our role as grandparents. She went off in secret and had her baby aborted. Our hearts were broken. It was after this that her relationship with the male she was with started to fall apart. They lasted another 18 months, then separated. Relationship with her became even harder after the abortion, but my reliance on God grew even more. We still had a relationship, but I was very boundaried and tried to keep things as neutral in topic as possible. After the relationship breakdown, B started to dress more male, changed her name by Depol, and started to become fixated on the fact that she again identified herself as a man. She started a new job, applying as a male, and then only being known by her male name by her work colleagues. She then started to have an issue with us again about the fact that we were not going along with her wishes. She's now 22 and has started a new relationship with another man. He identified as a straight male, but since being with her, he now identifies as a bisexual man who is with a man. From what I can pick up, he is encouraging her to put herself forward for transgender surgery. We've not met him, and he's told Becca he has no interest in meeting us as he classes us as transphobic. The last time we saw our daughter 2 months ago, she told us she couldn't have a relationship with us unless we she couldn't have a relationship with us if we refused to call her by her male name and refer to her as he. And then there's quite a lot more, so I think I'll leave it there. But basically, this lady affirms her trust in Christ, and she says that it's upsetting to see other parents who have gone along with their child's gender dysphoria, but she does understand the influence of the world and how powerful these forces are, but that it's not right to validate the confusion and gender dysphoria of children by allowing themselves to go down this path, which eventually ends in surgery and she doesn't use this word, but what is essentially a mutilation of a child's or a young adult's body. So yeah, I won't read any more of it except for that. She writes at the end, I believe that by what we have been through and continue to go through with B, that it could really help other Christian parents going through the same thing. But I find it hard to connect with other Christians outside of my immediate friends. It's not easy to stand on the word and not go along with what the world tells us to do. But we know that the path we walk with Jesus is a narrow one, but praise God, we have him to walk with. Nothing is impossible with God. Then she signs off in a very nice way. So, I mean, I wanted to read the whole of that out, chaps, because I think it's such a powerful statement, and it's very sad. And we do encourage people to keep her in and her family in your prayers. But I think one of the really important things in that email is the way that started was through one of these groups coming into the school and essentially introducing ideas to this young girl as she was at the time, that it would simply never have occurred to her otherwise. And it seems to me quite clear that this girl was rejected by her father as an infant, really, had trouble with the academic system, wasn't fitting in very well with her peers. And so this suggestion that was made to her was done so with her as a susceptible and impressionable child, essentially. And it is, I can't see it as anything else but abuse and manipulation. And I guess one of the main things I'd like to do through reading this out is just to make people aware of what's going on in schools and how seriously parents need to take this kind of thing if they don't want their children to be exposed to the same kind of, well, I don't even know what to call it, to be honest with you. Evil is all I can call it.
We need a culture change, don't we, where parents are a lot more proactive, and particularly in this PHSE stuff, are on the ball of asking,
it's incredibly hard.
What's happening? What can I see the lesson plan? What's this all about? What are you actually teaching my child? Many schools during this month will be doing all sorts of stuff that as parents, you and I could have no idea about.
Yeah, and I believe the government are strengthening diminishing the parental right to withdraw children from these classes as well, aren't they? Which is dreadful.
Yeah. And I've heard stuff. I mean, I don't know this in detail, but I've heard stuff about how these organisations offer to supply children with these kind of this equipment, like these breast binders, which essentially retard the growth of female children's breasts as they go through puberty and things like that, undermining any parental wishes at all. And you just think, if parents don't have the right and the responsibility to oversee a child in questions as to whether or not they should bind their breasts with a breast binder or put themselves on a track, which might end up in them having surgery, which will basically constitute the mutilation of their own genitals. It's hard to know what rights parents have at all if they have no say in such a thing.
Yeah, and the other thing is, quite frankly, to our listeners, give a child an iPhone at 10 or 11, and you've only yourself to blame.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it doesn't. You're right, Daniel. Because it doesn't even need one of these groups to come in, does it? I mean, if you give a kid an iPhone,
yeah, it's all there. It's all there at the fingertips. I suspect there are many children who are out there who are subconsciously crying out to mum and dad to take this thing away from them.
What do you think is, so, people are listening to this. I mean, I'm sure most people who listen to this are, they've got this far in the podcast, they're already, very sympathetic to what we're saying. But, there would be people who would say, well, you're just being restrictive. You're not affirming children, blah, blah, blah. So
it's not our job to simply affirm children. It's our job as parents to bring them into truth. And that I mean, I'm not even talking from a Christian perspective here. It's absurd. The idea that whatever goes on in a child's head is what should just be affirmed is ridiculous. Rowan Williams, who has been rather checkered on a number of things recently, wrote in his book Lost Icons a lament to childhood, by which he meant a time in which you're allowed to explore being an adult without, and I think it's particularly talking about teenagers here, without having having your decisions sort of bound to you, which they are when you're an adult. That's kind of the definition of an adult. Your decisions are bound to you. Until then, as a child, you should have a space to be able to say, I'm a girl, I'm a boy, I'm a fairy, I'm a tree, I'm a, whatever, and you shouldn't just go, okay, right, you're a tree. Okay, right, let's lop off your legs and plant you, It's like, it does so much damage to them.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of, if you were to try and put it as positively as possible, it's not that, you want to sort of cut off your children's choices or anything like that. It's you want their choices to actually remain open for as long as possible. Well, I don't know about long as possible, but for as long as is appropriate within a childhood. Because as you say, Tom, quite rightly, to curtail a child's choice by taking those things really seriously. I mean, my older child says he wants to be a train driver. And he's pretty firm about that. But then if I were to make every single decision in his childhood taking that really seriously. That would
take him out of school. You know, he doesn't need all that schooling.
Well, he doesn't go to school anyway, but
I know, but you know what I mean. Yeah,
stop educating him. You know,
stop educating him.
Just educate him only with a view to him becoming a train driver. But the point is that would limit him enormously, and it wouldn't leave open the kind of opportunities that should be open to him at the end of his childhood. And obviously, I think, you know, this whole thing is completely immoral. But just from a kind of secular perspective, I think you could also say that to, the transgender thing, not being a train driver. You know, you could say that to parents. It's like, this is not really what childhood is about, is it? It's not about, you know, putting children in a box and saying, you know, you must do X, Y, and Z, which is sort of ironic, isn't it? Because that's what they accuse conservatives of doing. They say, oh, you just want to like your child to be, you know, in a gender stereotype. But I just think, you know, if you give your children puberty blockers, or if you put them on a fast track to surgery, I mean, that's irreversible. You know, it's irreversible what you're doing to them. You're limiting them forever, for the rest of their life. What if they regret doing something like that?
I think as well, what we have is, you know, in the last couple generations, is a typical household. Both parents are working very long hours just to get the bills paid. You know, are treading water financially. They're time poor, and that. What previous generations have done in investing in terms of parenting and spending time with children is not necessarily there. I think it's easier to give them a device. It's easier to just think, oh well, the teachers will do all of that, and then the teaching profession, particularly if they're ideologically militant, will keen. Well, you know, we want parents to stay out of this, where the professionals, will. You can see what happens, don't you? That parenting then gets squeezed out, and you end up with a very limited daily interaction with your child, particularly with teenagers, when actually the reverse is needed, and it's damn hard work. Yeah. It's damn hard work to give that time. You know, things have to be sacrificed. Yeah, I think, quite honestly, I'm not saying it's laziness, but I think we're all just a bit fried, and this thing has come on the back of this. Yeah, we're not just giving the time that our children deserve.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Daniel, that you're making, which is that there is a link, isn't there, between this sort of vision of life that we've all been sold, that you can have two parents working full time, you can just stick your kids in school, and then the school will take care of your kids, and basically you don't have to. And then it's apt to be exploited by ideologues, or, you know, people who for whatever reason want to capture your children's imagination and give them a different view of reality to the one that you would want them to have. And your influences, I mean, it reminds me of that film True Lies, you know, with Arnold Schwarzenegger and that other guy, the funny guy whose name no one can ever
Danny DeVito.
No, that's twins. True Lies. It's another guy. Anyway, the other guy, you know, Schwarzenegger's having problems with his daughter, his teenage daughter, and the other guy says to him, "Look, you know, it's over. You know, you're the time when, you know, parents had influence over their children is over. Now their parents are Axl Rose and Madonna." And that was back in '95 when that was a contemporary reference. But that's the point. It's like, you know, these cultural figures now, unless you're intentional about it, will have more influence over your children than you do. Because they frankly, kids spend more time in their company than parents do. You know, if you give them a phone, if they're in school all day, blah, blah, blah. So that question over who is influencing your children, what is shaping and forming your child's imagination, their personality, their sense of what's right and wrong, their sense of reality, that's a fundamentally central question to what it means to be a parent. And certainly as Christians, it's something that we have to wrestle with. And it's obviously people will come to different conclusions as to what the answer is to that question. I guess what I'm saying is I think that question is more pertinent now than it's ever been in recent history, because you cannot trust schools in the way that I think you probably could when I was at school. You know, I don't remember stuff like this happening. You know, when I was at school in the 90s as a young child. So we really have to ask ourselves those questions in a serious way. Can my lifestyle, a bit like, the kind of thing Roger said in the Benedict option, can my lifestyle really, and my financial goals, can it really sustain a faithful commitment to my children? Can it sustain that? Or do I need to rethink what my priorities are and perhaps make some sacrifices either individually or for us as a family, financially, and so on and so forth, in order to create an environment in which it's more likely that my child will be protected and my child will grow up as a Christian, and so on and so forth. So I think that's really important. Yeah. Okay, chaps. Well, I think it'd probably be good to draw things to a close there. I appreciate your time as always. Sorry again about your sports day being rained off, Tom, but it's been good to have you here.
Lovely to be here.
To get your take on stuff. Just to say, if people appreciate what we're doing here on the show, you can always support the show, patreon.com/irreverend, for as little as £1.50 per month plus VAT in the UK. We appreciate anything you give because it helps us, gives us options now and in the future. And if you'd like to email the show, you can do so at irreverendpod@gmail.com. We do like to receive your emails. We read all of them, respond to all of them pretty much. And they obviously help us with the show because we often read them out as well. Sometimes funny, sometimes serious, is the one we had today. And follow us on Twitter @irreverendpod. Join our Telegram, t.me/irreverend. And I think that's about it. I think it's about all the social media stuff.
We should end with a prayer.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Who wants to do it? Daniel.
I'll do a blessing.
Go on.
May God give you the grace to follow his saints. May you take up your cross daily, knowing that he who asks this of you says that his yoke is easy, his burden light. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with you and remain with you always. Amen.
Amen. Well, thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks everyone for listening. Goodbye now.